This is Alissa.
And this is Terri. Welcome to med-surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
This podcast is an engaging look at the lives of and surrounding medical surgical nurses.
We're proud med-surg nurses, just like you, sharing our stories, insights, and experiences to support you in your nursing journey.
Unfortunately, Caroline and Chelsea couldn't be with us today, but we are once again very fortunate to have with us our favorite guest co-host, AMSN CEO, Terri Hinkley. Terri, how have you been? Tell me what's new.
Hey, Alissa. So great to be here. This is one of my favorite activities. I think I said that last time too, but it's so true. Crazy busy. I think I said that last time too, but it certainly remains to be the case. I had a lovely weekend and a lovely Mother's Day. What about you? Did you have a nice Mother's Day?
I did. We decided that we were going to do labor and build a fence. So our fence blew down in a horrible windstorm in our backyard, and that was the weekend we needed to fix it. So that's how we spent it. But low key, it was nice. I was loved and appreciated by my family. So
that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Good.
We rescued a new puppy. So things have been chaotic, I guess, in the Hinkley household. And our new puppy is a little rescue. It's a Chihuahua Terrier mix. He's just a little guy. So now we're working on house training and crate training, which, as you can imagine, it requires us to be very disciplined in order to be disciplined for him, right? Yes. To be able to actually learn how to go to the bathroom outside and stay in his crate. But so far, I mean, he's sleeping through the night. I sound like I have a newborn. He's sleeping through the night. He's eating well. So
he's growing.
But awesome. No, he's doing great.
Awesome. That's very cool. What did you name your puppy?
Oh, his name is Holtby. So most of you probably know my daughter. We're from Canada. I know I've said that before, most certainly, but my daughter is an ice hockey player and she's a goalie. So we named him Holtby after a Canadian goalie that played on the Washington Capitals, which is one of Rachel's favorites. So,
oh, how fun.
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite fun. Very cool. Very cool. Well, good luck with your puppy duty, because that's going to keep you busy for a bit.
Yeah, it will. It'll keep my husband busier than me, but it certainly will keep us busy for sure.
That's very cool. I had just gotten back from an anniversary trip. My husband and I are celebrating 22 years because we had to do the round number so that neither one of us will forget how long. It's like, what year is it? Oh yeah, 22. So we just got back from a fun trip in southern Utah. The weather was beautiful. It was so much fun and exactly what I needed to unwind, decompress, get a little bit of me time in. And it was so much fun.
That's awesome. And Utah is so beautiful.
Oh my gosh. And it's the red rocks of southern Utah, they're just so beautiful. Oh, daydreaming of going back. It is.
Yeah. So when are you booked to go back?
I know, right? That's the problem is I feel like I used to travel so frequently before the pandemic started and that came to a screeching halt. And now I'm ready to okay, I need to get back out there and start planning again. And my husband is still a little more slow and hesitant. And not quite ready to get out there like I am. So baby steps.
Well, and you've done your first. So hopefully it'll just pave the way to more.
Oh yeah, I hope so. All right. Well, why don't you tell us what we're going to get into today, Terri?
I felt that with the RaDonda Vaught conviction and her sentencing coming up Friday, I just would love to explore and have a conversation with you and reflect what I think is probably on members and nurses' minds as they think about this and the implications of it. So for those of you that might not be familiar, although I'm sure most are, RaDonda Vaught was a nurse working at Vanderbilt in Tennessee, and she committed a medication error. And unfortunately, the patient died as a result of the medication error. She was supposed to administer Versed, and she administered vecuronium instead, which is a paralyzing agent, didn't realize her error. And as a result, the patient was left alone, not monitored. And if you know anything about paralyzing agents, they paralyze all of the muscles in the body. So the patient basically suffocated, which would be horrible. And especially horrible because you're still awake and alert during that. So certainly a tragic and awful death. From what I've been able to understand of the story, and I did read the CMS investigation in its entirety and have followed closely with the news. Initially, Vanderbilt terminated the nurse and she was referred to the Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing didn't take any action initially, said that there was no negligence or no fault there. And then there was an anonymous whistleblower complaint to CMS to say that this patient death had occurred at Vanderbilt as a result of an error, and Vanderbilt had never reported it. So the CMS came in and did an investigation, and over the course of their investigation made several recommendations and cited Vanderbilt for a number of things that they wanted to see put in place, but it somehow resulted in that case being re-referred to the Tennessee Board of Nursing. And the second time that an investigation was held or a hearing was held, she actually lost her nursing license. So we feel that that's all really appropriate, but then what happened, and we're not entirely sure how or why, it ended up getting referred for criminal consideration. So charges were brought, one of which was criminally negligent homicide, and she was found guilty. And her sentencing hearing is actually this Friday, May 13th. I know court schedules and calendars are not based on anything other than the availability of the court, but it also just seems to be so unfortunate that it's at the conclusion of Nurses Week. This is going to happen. And she faces up to 8 years in prison as a result of this error. And I just feel that it's important that we have conversations both with the public, but also within nursing and the healthcare industry to talk about the implications, or what I think are some of the scary implications of charging and finding someone guilty criminally for making an error in their work. It can be somewhat divisive. As we're talking about it, AMSN's perspective is the nurse certainly was negligent, admitted as much, fully disclosed the error, fully owned the error, and actually said in her testimony that she would not have done anything different. Even if she's convicted, which she was, she would not do anything differently in terms of her responsibility or accountability for the error. But I think the criminalization of medical errors, which you know, Alissa, I mean, we've all read To Err is Human. We know the scope of the problem. It's the third leading cause of death in the United States. That's medical errors causing death. The number of near misses or harms to patients that don't result in death is even astronomically higher. And I'm just quite worried about this precedent that's been set that someone could go to jail for committing a medical error. And what concerns me is when we try and espouse high reliability organizations and just culture as a means to understanding the system issues that lead to medical errors so that we can prevent them and make the healthcare system safer, this is a big step back in AMSN's opinion.
This feels like a giant step backwards, because if you are in an organization that struggles to have a just culture and you are working really hard to encourage that reporting so that you can identify system issues, man, this is really going to be a hit in that encouraging people to report. It's hard enough to get people to report if you have a very solid, just cause, a system quality improvement perspective in the way that you manage error. And then you have something like this. I know a lot of the perception of what happened by the nurses that I talk to is they feel like Vanderbilt threw the nurse under the bus. And so now there's this fear of, is my employer going to just sell me down the river if CMS comes knocking at the door? And if you fear that, what can we do to protect ourselves? How can we not feel like not only do I have to guard my own license, but now it's like, do I have to have extra coverage and extra protection for myself just in case, because my employer is not going to do anything to help me either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And we're hearing that concern most certainly. We did a webinar yesterday for AMSN on moving forward from after RaDonda Vaught's conviction. And we had two speakers, Sarah Bush and Maureen Murphy, that have both spoken at convention before. They're both really expert management practitioners. Sarah was a previous paralegal that works for a healthcare system now and has been doing risk management for several years. And Maureen Murphy's a nursing leader that also has been quite active in risk management. And they were making that point as well. Not only were they making the point that your hospital or institution is not likely to cover you, even if they have insurance, if it's a criminal case, that as soon as it hits the level of criminal, you probably won't have any protection from your hospital or institution. So it could be a call to all nurses to look at carrying their own insurance. The other thing that Maureen said was really just to your point, we are responsible for our own individual practice, and we are going to have to be that much more vigilant and speak up frequently, loudly, and often if we are put in positions that we feel risk our ability to provide safe and effective care. If I were RaDonda, or if someone faced a similar situation, perhaps say, I'm not comfortable going down to the X-ray department or the diagnostic imaging department to administer this medication. Bring the patient back up here. We'll administer the medication and then we'll send her back down. Is that effective and efficient? Maybe not efficient, but it allows the nurse to practice in a way that they're comfortable doing. And there was a lot of advocating for ourselves as practitioners as actions in this webinar. And it will be available in our online library. We're just putting the video, et cetera, together, but it will be in the online library. And I encourage everyone to watch that, because I think part of our message around here, in addition to the concern that we have for the action that was taken and the precedent that was set, and to your point, we know that errors are system issues, yet it's only one person being held accountable here. So I certainly get the position and the perspective of your colleagues that are like, well, wait a minute, it seems like we're pinning this all on her, and there were several other issues. Like I said, let's just have these conversations and let's talk about how we can be more assertive in protecting our own licenses, because it really does come down to us individually.
When we talk about making sure that we're raising our voices and standing up and stuff, I'm wondering how empowered nurses are feeling doing that right now, given the current climate with the mass exit, quitting, leaving the profession, high nurse-patient ratios, all of this kind of stuff.
It has been a really tough couple of years for our profession. I've been a nurse for 35 years, and I think it's the toughest for a number of reasons. The pandemic, the public response, the fact that nurses have been called actors and liars, and how you go from being the most trusted profession in the world to being liars and actors that are just perpetuating falsehoods. I think at our core shook nursing a lot when you consider who we are and what we stand for, and our personal values, morals, and ethics that we all have. And then we're hit with staffing, which has always been a problem. We certainly know that, but it's been compounded through the pandemic. And there have been several nurses that are just like, I can't do this anymore. It's just not worth it now. The risk is not worth the lack of reward for doing a job that I loved for most of my career. And that's not only just nurses that are, have the opportunity perhaps to retire a bit earlier than they thought. We lost 1.5% of the nursing population last year, and it was new nurses. So that's even going to further compound it. So I think you raise a good point, and I think that's why we're trying to have as many conversations as we can about this, because we are fast approaching, if we're not there already, I think, a crisis within the profession and our ability to continue to move forward.
We were already heading toward a national staffing shortage with the baby boomer generation getting into retirement age. we were getting into that experience complexity gap between so many being retired and not enough people coming in and gaining that experience in time. And then it's just compounded with people who are in the profession, leaving the profession because we have all of these additional almost politicky type things kind of happening. And I don't know about everybody, but I don't want politics in my job. I just want to come to work, do my job, take care of my patients and leave. It is a very rewarding job, but it's a very thankless job. And so it's always that internal reward. And when that starts going away, it's really easy. I do know a lot of nurses that have pulled out, and it's really sad because they're really good at what they do and they just decide they can't do it anymore. And this situation only makes it worse and only makes it easier for people to make that decision. I feel like if all jobs had a component where if you make this mistake, you might go to jail, I think every person in every industry would be very hesitant about working. And that's kind of what this new component has done, is now every time I go and give medication, there's this new component of like, wow, if I don't do this right, I'm going to have to go to jail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think I would say I most certainly don't have all of the answers, and nor does AMSN. But really, for those that are thinking like, maybe I should just go sell shoes, or maybe I should go and do something else, that's a very personal decision. And you can only decide what's best for yourself as an individual. If there's anything that I feel is coming out of this, it's almost that we're coming together and realizing we're going to have to lead change, and we're going to have to make the changes that we want to see in the profession. And I wrote my CEO corner for the newsletter last week. And I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet, Alissa. And I really encourage people to read it, because I said that it's Nurses Week /month, and it's the third year in a row, but it feels different. It feels like there's not much to celebrate for all of these reasons. And I did a call to action where I'm asking nurses to really start demanding better. Let's demand better, because we actually, I think for one of the first times ever, have more power than we've ever had because of the shortages and because we're so critical to the delivery of healthcare, that if we come together and collectively demand better, demand safer workplaces, demand safer staffing, I think we have more power to be able to drive change than we ever had before. So if you're feeling, I've just got no more gas in the tank left to give, see if there's a way to join together with some of your peers and colleagues and start making recommendations to your hospital or institution. Start having those conversations and start trying to drive national discussions. I think that could bring a little bit of some action to it that might have some meaning for individuals, and it turns us into active participants in our future. We get to create the future that we want.
I think that's great advice. It's interesting how when you enter the nursing profession, at least for me, I didn't realize what a large profession I was getting involved in. And I didn't realize I could really choose my level of involvement and my level of advocacy. And now is the time that we really do need to group together, band together, and speak together, right? And make those decisions of what we need and what we want, because we really are so critical and there really is that shortage. And so it's like, if you want us, you need us.
Yeah. Leverage the power. Collectively, we have more power, I think, than we've had in several years. So let's leverage it. Let's start advocating for the minimum of what we should be able to expect from our employers and our workplaces, given how critical we are to it. So I think that there's really an opportunity for us to do that. Join your national association, whatever specialty that might be. Bring your voice and volunteer for certain activities. Get active legislatively. They actually made the point on the webinar yesterday as well to get involved down to the local level of understanding who's on your ballot, because district attorneys, for example, are elected positions. And you want to know if the people on the ballot are also going to support sending nurses to prison for making errors. Demand change in our communities, in our workplaces, and everywhere. and do that with your national association, but also with your colleagues, your peers, and in any other way that you can.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And when it comes down to malpractice insurance for nurses, something we should all be considering.
Yeah, that was kind of eye-opening. I think I might have known it, but it didn't sort of hit home until it became really relevant over the last couple of months as we watched the trial unfold. But when Sarah mentioned yesterday that the employer's malpractice won't cover you in the event of criminal charges or investigations, I was like, okay, so we have to get that word out there that individuals might want to look at having their own protection there as well.
Well, and it would be worth looking into if malpractice insurance covers criminal, because I have no idea. That would be interesting. So my other question, and I'm not sure if this is something that you have an opinion on, but it feels like, because this happened 5 years ago, why did this not make any, why wasn't this mainstream news? Do you know? Do you have an idea on this?
So it certainly did happen back in 2017. You're absolutely correct. So it was 5 years ago, but nothing happened until CMS actually did their investigation. And the trial was obviously more recent, and the conviction was just within the last month or two. You know, it was interesting. I did another podcast as well. And the host asked me, he's like, why was this not in the mainstream news? And how did we not know about this? And he was speaking more from a public perspective. And that's a great question, because I know I certainly was watching the news closely, but several folks that I've talked to about this had no clue. Personally, my opinion, so take it for what you feel it's worth.
That's why I asked. I value it.
Thank you. I almost feel like our 24-hour news cycle drowns out news, because there's always a new headline. Literally, the 24-hour news cycle, I think, has actually done a disservice to people for being able to stay aware of what's happening. It's just a constant barrage of new updates. And so there was nothing else, air quote, newsworthy, in my opinion, that was happening at the same time as the trial or conviction. And it certainly was in the news. I just feel there's so much news all the time now. People aren't seeing it, or they're not realizing, or quite frankly, they're overwhelmed. I know I do this. Don't you sometimes look at a headline and think, I just don't have the capacity for bad news right now? Like, I'm not even going to click. I'm not in the right mindset to read one more story about something that I know is going to upset me. So sometimes we kind of bury our head in the sand a little bit and don't actually engage with the news that I feel we should be engaging with, because we don't feel that we have the emotional or psychological capacity to read that story. So I don't know. Did you see this in the news? Like, were you?
No, I did not see this in the news until it was like in court at trial in the last couple of months. So even then I had to have coworkers kind of point it out to me and say, hey, have you heard what's going on? And that's when I looked it up and started catching on to it. So that, again, it makes me wonder, because I do kind of keep an eye out for those kinds of stories, and I'm interested in that kind of stuff. And so it did not catch my eye at all until a couple months ago when she was actually in court. But then once everything was in court and it became more well-known in the nursing community of what was going on, then it was very alarming, because it felt like it came out of nowhere. And then trying to ascertain what actually had happened and how it came to pass, I think there was more fear and confusion for people who, and still probably is, for people who didn't really understand how it happened. And then again, that fear that your hospital is just going to like toss you out there as a scapegoat or something. And it's hard to look at your organization. Like for me, I've been in my organization for 15 years. I can't imagine like feeling like they would just kind of like serve me up on a platter. But that's kind of the narrative that I was hearing from people, is like, wow, Vanderbilt really just tossed her out there, but not really knowing the circumstances on how it transitioned from going back from the Board of Nursing over to referred for criminal cases. You know, we just don't know.
Right. I'm still not certain, even with everything that I've been able to read and engage with, sort of what the decision point for that was or where that came from. So unfortunately, I agree. It seems that RaDonda did not have the support of Vanderbilt, or certainly that she was solely held responsible for this. And again, I will say she certainly administered the medication. She made that error. But have you ever heard of the Swiss cheese model from James Reason? And he's a professor emeritus at Manchester University in the UK. And he's done a ton of work in human errors. And he was the one that came up with this kind of Swiss cheese model, which basically says that good people work in bad systems and that systems contribute to errors happening. And that if you were to stack up a number of slices of Swiss cheese, each of them have their holes or their failures in them, if you think of it in the context of making an error. But when you line them all up, very rarely do all those holes line up such that you could see a clear sight line through to the other side. And when they do, that's when errors happen. So when you think of this case, she wasn't the patient's nurse. She was a resource/float nurse within the intensive care step-down unit. She was asked to go and administer the medication in the diagnostic imaging. She was orienting someone at the time. She went into the medication room to pull the medication. It wasn't in there from pharmacy yet. So that's when she overrode and entered VE for Versed and didn't notice that it was vecuronium that came out. She said she never noticed that the vial had a paralyzing agent on the lid in red letters. She also didn't realize that she shouldn't be reconstituting the medication, that Versed comes already as a liquid form, and that she had to actually reconstitute, and she didn't realize that. And then she went down to the diagnostic imaging department, administered the medication, and then left again. So certainly multiple failures on her part, but also the fact that all of these other system sort of errors, the fact that she was orienting. So was she really paying attention? And apparently she admitted that while she was pulling the medication, she was talking to the person that she was orienting, and she was doing some teaching at the time. Like there was just multiple levels. And if we don't try and understand, and this is, the absolute foundation of just culture and the Institute of Medicine report, that if we don't understand how every single hole in every single piece of Swiss cheese can lead to an error, and we only do that if people report and tell us when they've either encountered it or where they've had a near miss or they've actually made an error that allows us to look at everything, we're never going to know. And when we're trying to make the healthcare system safer, my fear is that this precedent is actually going to make us less safe, because I'm worried that nurses aren't going to report, or all healthcare practitioners actually, because other healthcare practitioners can certainly identify with RaDonda as well. And I think that if they start to say, well, I can't report because I might go to prison, that's going to prevent us from knowing all the holes in our Swiss cheese. And that's fundamentally my concern.
That ultimately captures what the real concern is for a lot of us, is the lack of reporting and the fear that those systemic issues that we were identifying with just culture is going to start going away. So I think that you've really summarized that quite nicely. So unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time, but this is a great conversation and we could certainly go on and on for it.
Certainly a necessary conversation. So certainly welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation with our members, with nurses all over, and as a profession, and with the public, to be honest, because I think the public certainly has to have a role in this. And I think needs to be advocating for safer healthcare systems for themselves as a means to further drive change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that if the general population understood how this might impact their future healthcare, they would be advocating differently too. So,
right.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, we do look forward to connecting with you on our next episode of med-surg Moments, the AMSN podcast. In the meantime, we do want to hear from you. Send us your questions, topic ideas, and feedback via our official med-surg Moments email address. That's amsnpod@amsn.org. That's amsnpod@amsn.org. I'd also like to remind you to become a member of AMSN or to renew your membership at www.amsn.org. You will receive lots of cool benefits and perks such as discounted pricing on annual convention and continuing education.
We encourage you to help us spread the word and subscribe to med-surg Moments podcast via your smartphone podcast app to receive notifications of future episodes. Please be sure to leave us a review and recommend med-surg Moments wherever you get your podcasts to help us reach even more listeners. I invite you to join the conversation by sharing your ideas and questions on AMSN's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter pages. And don't forget to add hashtag med-surg Moments to your post. Simply enter AMSN in the search field on any of these social media platforms to connect with us.
The content within the med-surg Moments podcast represents the views, thoughts, and opinions of the co-hosts and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses. Until next time, I'm Alissa.
And this is Terri. And always remember, med-surg Moments is a moment in our lives, a moment in our med-surg careers that make a huge difference.